I'm Al McFarlane. Good afternoon. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. Friday, and today is the day we convene the Healing Circle. It's in conjunction with our colleagues, our friends at the African American Child Wellness Institute. And that organization enables us to bring together trusted leaders, thought leaders and practitioners in the field of health and mental health. And for the past so long, we've been focusing on the impact of COVID-19 and discussing the strategies to encourage, support, promote vaccination, or at least principled strategies that people may discover to keep themselves and their families and their communities safe during the COVID-19
I
um,
can't hear.
pandemic. I hear you. Somebody can't hear me, and I can't hear you, but I hear you perfectly. So I want to begin by thanking the African American Child Wellness Institute for partnering with us to bring this series of conversations. And I want to acknowledge two powerful friends and leaders and mental health professionals who are going to be leading today's conversation. Actually, I'm going to turn it over to them. I'll play the role of a questioner and someone to ensure that the the ordinary curiosity that I bring as a reporter and just as a neighbor hopefully reflects your questions and concerns as well. But you know what? You can participate in this conversation. We're live on YouTube and we also are streaming live to Facebook. And you can join with comments on YouTube or post your comments or questions in the comment section on Facebook. We'll be monitoring both of those streams and can perhaps bring you into the conversation. Sherilyn LaChapelle, my friend Sherilyn, how are you? Good to see you.
I am good, exhausted, but good. I just got back in town. It was supposed to be Monday, and I didn't get in for 2 days, trapped, canceled flights because of the storm in Denver.
Wow, wow.
So I haven't
we,
caught up yet on
were,
rest.
were you in Denver or the
No,
Denver
I
storm
was
blocked your
in
flight?
Charlotte trying to get
Okay,
out, but
but
planes that were on the ground in Denver couldn't leave.
got it, got it. Amazing. Well, I'm glad you made it back and glad you're safe. Let me ask you, how are you feeling about travel? Has this been the
Uh,
first time, or have you traveled a lot since the
this was
pandemic started?
my first time. I had both
Mhm.
my shots. The last one, January 30th. I had my
Uh,
mask on. So I knew I was not going anywhere until at least a month after I got my last immunization
mhm.
and until they started getting more people immunized.
So, what was the travel experience? Because I'm in the same boat you were in. I kind of have decided I'm not going to travel till I feel good and safe. And
Yeah.
even though I've had both shots, Bob, I've had both shots, but we don't feel comfortable traveling at the moment. And I'm thinking it might be a few months before I am comfortable. But I don't, and I just I've gotten used to not being around crowds too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
tell
I
me
didn't
what you.
like the crowd scene. Uh,
Uh,
Fortunately, I had empty seat between myself and the next passenger, but
Great.
still,
Yeah.
But I guess I felt pretty safe.
Hmm.
I had on one of those N99 masks,
Okay.
and I hadn't seen my daughter in over a year, so.
Hmm.
And she hadn't had her immunization yet, so I was the one that was going to travel to see she and my grandson.
Right. Right. Okay. Uh, Describe the feeling and the scene at the airport, number one, and you described already the actual plane trip. You kind of felt how was moving around and keeping distance in the airport working for you, both in
That
Charlotte
wasn't
and here.
working. It was packed because of the cancellations. And
Okay.
coming back, that plane was full. And again, I got lucky, had an empty seat between myself and the other lady. But the airport was full.
Hmm.
All the weather everywhere, people trying to get home who had been forced to either spend the night in the hotel or find a hotel room. I mean, in the airport or find a hotel room.
Hmm. And then when you're on the plane, so you're lucky because you got a seat between you and the ex-passenger. But how do you feel about the person in front of you and the person behind? Because that may be only a foot or 2 or 3 feet, depending on the
Exactly.
plane you're in. And I just remember, one of the scariest things flying for me is you sitting on a plane and somebody near or far starts hacking
Coffee.
or coughing or sneezing, and that just trips me out, and I don't know. So I don't know if I'm ready to deal with that anytime soon. So, how did you feel
I
about the person
agree.
in front or in back?
I was, I realized people were going to be coughing because I'm one of those people because of allergies and
Uh,
asthma that I'm
mhm.
coughing all the time and I'm getting the dirty looks,
Okay.
even with a mask on. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
But I had on a hospital grade mask, and I felt like I was pretty safe because had I had any doubt, I would have stayed at home like
Hmm.
I did for the past year. I didn't go anywhere.
Well, I'm glad you made the trip, and it's great to get this report. And is your daughter getting scheduled for
She
shots now?
is. She is.
Uh, what's the discussion that you have with your daughter about whether or not or when and how to get the shots and how to manage and navigate the pandemic?
Well, my daughter, we talk regularly, and there was no question that she was going to get the shot. She had no question about it. She was wanting to get it ASAP, if not yesterday, but
Hmm.
it wasn't her turn yet.
Hmm.
And my grandson is the one that I had to have the conversation with because unfortunately he'd been on the internet and listening to all the crazy folks on the internet about it's a hoax, it's 5G, it's not real. But we had the almost 3 weeks I was there, we had some good conversation
Hmm.
about it.
How
So
old is
he
your
gets it.
grandson?
He's 23 now.
That's the age of invincibility, anyway, right?
And insanity. Yes. But my daughter also said that if he didn't get that shot, he couldn't live in that house.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, also here is, excuse me, now I'm sneezing. That's why I'm glad I'm not on the
Uh-oh.
plane. Yeah. Yolanda Lee is here, and Tanayi Hurd is here. Yolanda, how are you? Good to see you, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you. I too did some traveling, and so Sherilyn and I have been uh, chatting back and forth, and glad to be back home. But I left Florida. It was 82 degrees, and came back home, and it was 28 with snow on the ground. And
Yeah.
so,
Right.
but I will also just tag off of what Sherilyn said. I did not, quite frankly, have any fears or inhibitions about traveling. I did not have a seat in between. I had my little grandbaby, and then there was another that sat in the seat. And so I was mainly concerned about her in the
Mhm.
close quarters, but everyone traveled well. Everyone was very cognizant, had their really high grade, as Sherilyn noted, high grade masks. Folks were using disinfectant. The airlines was very, very
Oh, yeah.
um, conscientious about just walking through and reminding folks to move the mask up over their nose and
Mhm. Mhm.
to just be cognizant of that. There was no sharing of food. You had to purchase your own
Mm-mm.
food and and um,
So
and
they
drinks.
kind of accommodated you to do what you have to do to eat your food and
Absolutely,
and stay masked at the same time, right? So take a
exactly,
bite, put the mask back on.
Yeah.
Take a sip, put the mask
exactly.
back on. Yeah,
Oh my God.
and
Yes.
but it sounds like people were understanding and cooperative, and
Absolutely,
that's a good
absolutely.
thing. Yeah.
That's a marvelous thing. And, I know from what I heard, and Sherilyn and I are, as you know, not very shy. So I was sharing with her that while I was sitting by the pool, I was talking to folks about COVID. And we had a couple of interactions and groups while we were there. The hotel industry probably is hit the hardest. Folks are just starting to travel again. So, but they, I feel very comfortable and relieved by the same note. And folks are wanting the truth, as Sherilyn noted. They don't want to have the fake news. They want to know, what can you tell me, where can I find the information that's going to be factual to help me and to also share with my family and my community. So,
Sherilyn, you were staying with family, or did you stay in a hotel when you were traveling?
I stayed with my daughter, but I went down to Charleston for the weekend. She had to work, and she works at home. So, but I went down there, stayed in the hotel, had a great time. The people were social distanced in the restaurants and whatnot. And like Yolanda, I was holding court at the bar having my lunch. I said, "Oh, did you?" I said, I just put my hand up. I said, I had my shots. When somebody walked by, how they look at you, you got your mask on. But that was my entree to the conversation. You say that, and then, oh, you had just, yeah. Did you get yours yet?
yes.
I was thinking, what are you thinking about? Dying of COVID? Which one is it? Because that's like a horrible way to go, girl. You suffocate, have heart attacks, blood clots in the lungs, strokes, and the people who have died, they found they have some brain damage. Then they've got this long hauler syndrome where people, even though they've gotten over it, are still suffering months later. And there's much we don't know about what damages totally COVID can do to you. So you're afraid of what again?
Well, I was curious, Yolanda and Sherilyn, about your hotel experience, and you were mentioning, Yolanda, that industry is one of the most hardest hit industries. And I'm curious to know what your experiences were. Was your hotel crowded, half full, quarter full, as far as you could tell?
I would say when I arrived, it was less than half, about a third.
Yep.
And Fairfield by Marriott was where we stayed. And they had just recently opened and agreed to open for spring break. They were not providing any meals. They were not doing the daily housekeeping of changing linens and things like that. You had to request linens to be changed, and there was a process. So you needed to be out of your room so that it could be sanitized for at least 8 hours. So if you knew you were going to be out at SeaWorld or whatever, then you let them know. You pick the date, and then you needed to bag up your own linens, your own towels, put it in a secured bag, set it outside the door. They'd come in, sanitize your room, and change the linen. So it was very well thought out.
Oh, that's amazing.
And I felt extremely safe.
And the workers feel safer probably too.
Oh, yeah.
For not having to handle soiled, or used linen, right?
That's right.
And yeah, okay, cool. I didn't know how that. I haven't been to anywhere, So
I hadn't either.
like I said, and no plan to go anytime soon. And I love traveling, right?
Right.
I have certainly not gone anywhere. Tanae, tell me the proper way to say your name. I'm saying Tinanye. Okay, great.
Beautiful.
How are you doing today?
Great. Thank you.
I'll ask you the same question. Any travel or anything, either past or on the upcoming calendar for you?
Well, unfortunately, I will be traveling. I'm attending my grandmother's memorial next Friday. Unfortunately, so I will be traveling. I've been vaccinated, so I personally now I have less reservations. Just being educated on COVID, on the vaccinations, on just the symptoms, the treatment, just that has really put a lot of my anything that I thought before about the vaccination or COVID, it's put all those fears to rest, really. I did travel once last month, and they were doing 6 foot. There was no person in the middle seats on the planes, which was really great. I stayed at a hotel, and my experience was similar to Miss Yolanda's, where they sanitized the room. You had to be out. It was really comfortable, and that was before I got the vaccination. So, and I'm great.
Okay, great. So what kind of impact does COVID-19 have on your family's memorial celebration for your grandma? How's that changed, or what are they doing to make that, safe for the family?
It actually, my grandmother was well loved in the community in Illinois. And so this actually is going to have a huge impact on the memorial. We're going to actually stream the service, because she was requested to be cremated. So there'll just be a picture. There won't be any open casket type things, but just the number of people that wanted to come, and knowing that the family, we had to limit that. And it really has impacted just the way that we do funerals. The family even coming together, we're coming together a few at a time, making sure that we're vaccinated, even with clearing out her things, clearing out her apartment. We just have to be very careful, because we have people coming from all over the country, and everyone is not observing, social distancing. Everyone is not vaccinated. Everyone, has different views on that. So it's hugely impacted it, where the funeral, the actual memorial service, is going to be 3 weeks out. So, that's been the main impact, is that, we're just trying to do everything a little at a time and safely.
Talk about your grandmother. Just celebrate her for a minute.
Oh, my grandmother was a frontline worker. She was actually a registered nurse all her life, since she was about 21 years old. And
wow.
Yes, and she passed away at 78. So she had been retired for the last 10 years. Unfortunately, she had come down with sarcoidosis. So she was very active in her church of Holy Angels. She had gone there since she was a child. This was, a school that we all, actually, my family went to.
Is this Chicago?
This is Chicago. We went to Holy Angels. Yes, she went to Holy Angels, and she never left there. And we all went through Holy Angels, and just for her to have that presence in the church community, to have that presence as a medical worker, just always there for people. It's up until her death, and the impact that it had on me is due to COVID and due to her having sarcoidosis. I couldn't go visit her, because I didn't want to compromise her health over this last year. So, I sent a lot of letters and, made a lot of phone calls, but, nothing really replaces that face-to-face contact. But, she did know that in her final days, she was so loved by the community and by her family. And even though we couldn't get together, but it had been over a year since I'd seen her as well. So that, that's the main way that COVID has impacted our family, is that we couldn't see each other, and we didn't want to compromise her health.
What hospital did she work at when she was working?
She worked at Rush Presbyterian.
Okay, yeah. I worked at Cook County, across the street.
She started actually working at Cook County back in 76 or 77. Around
I was there then.
Oh, well, you guys were probably working together. She was the LPN at that time, and I was born there at Cook County Hospital while she was on duty.
What's her name?
Laura Harris. Laura Gary Harris. Her name was Laura Ann. Yes.
Okay. Wow.
Well, this is wonderful just to have this conversation, and sharing and seeing how we're all connected,
Yeah.
And so, Sherlyn and Yolanda, as you think about Tinanye and families having to do things that we have to do when transitions occur, when people move to ancestorship. That's what I call it. When they transition from being present to their next role as an ancestor. What are we doing? What are you saying and seeing in the community here and or around the country in terms of how we handle that? Because a transition ceremony is a big event, traditionally in our culture, a major event. And so I know that all of us are thinking about either having to go through or when we may have to go through a transition and how that'll be impacted by COVID-19. Glad to hear Tananya talk about how her family has kind of rallied to understand that some people are more accepting, some people are less, but you have to be planful, right? And accommodate, but educate at the same time. What should we be telling our community about how we handle our obligations to support and acknowledge people's transition into ancestorship?
I think we have. I'd like to just kind of jump in there because as you noted, our community transitioning homegoing is a huge event that we all when we all come together, several, intergenerationally. Oftentimes we haven't, we laugh about it historically that we never see anybody until someone passes away. So we really need to have a family reunion. But that is also a celebration and a grieving time. One of the things that I noted is that my sister passed away last April, right in the middle of COVID, when everybody was quarantined, everybody was isolated, and she was a pillar of our community. She was the oldest of my father's children. She was, almost like a mother to me, my mentor. And that was not something we saw coming. And so one of the things that I will respectfully say, and I'm sure Tanaye and Sherlyn can piggyback, but I think at that particular time, we had all of the unknowns. No one had answers. This was April. This was in the middle of our lockdown. And the church had said, nope, not doing it. This was, as Tananya talked about, my sister had been a member of that church. That was the one thing that she made clear to everybody. She loved her church home, and she ministered to anyone and everybody that she came across. And that was the one thing that she wanted, was to be able to be to make that transition at her church home. It really took a lot of convincing and advocating with the pastor and other members of the church, as well as our family member, because again, we were right in the midst of the lockdown. But we were able to have that conversation in a thoughtful way, by telephone at that particular time. And we scheduled folks to be able to go and come and view the body in shifts. We all agreed that her children and grandchildren should be the only ones and we agreed to this with the pastor and the church so that it was a smaller event. But we were really trying to, as you talked about, to celebrate and be a part of, her wishes that one last time. And so it was a lot harder then than it sounds as if it is now. But I think as a community, we still want to celebrate and to reverence our elders and be able to keep their wishes at the forefront of this transition as a part of our grieving. But we're able to do it, I believe, now a lot more systematically. We have more tools now as to how do we do these things, that we are a COVID-19 transition team, if you will, for lack of a better word, than we were in April of 2020.
Yeah.
What do you think, Sherlyn?
Well, my sister's best friend, who's also a friend of mine, that was our next door neighbor growing up. And she still lives in the house, after her parents died. Her granddaughter was shot last week in Chicago in Calumet Park. And Tanaya, if you have been following the news, you probably heard about it. And she was, what, 25? And we're getting ready I'm going to be driving there next week. And just torn up, the whole family's torn up. I got grandchildren that I love. And it just made me think about how horrible that is to lose a child. Mm-hmm. And our families are very close. We're very spiritual. And we're going to be there for each other. Mm-hmm. And it's just a lot to stomach, you know. And for those of us who have lost loved ones, I know that pain that people are all experiencing. This disease has taken many a loved one, sometimes multiple family members from families. And they're trying to cope with the grief and the fear of this disease while trying to stay safe and trying to figure out what they do next.
What's the story of the young woman who was shot? I'm so sorry to hear that.
She was wrong place, wrong time, walking down the street.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And they had my nephew last year was shot on his porch, gang initiation. He was coming from work over in Chatham, owned his home. And they just rolled up on him and shot him 3 times. But God was with him. And and they went around a couple blocks later and shot a woman. Same thing. And then they shot a man who didn't survive. But my nephew and that woman were taken to the University of Chicago. My nephew had 3-4 surgeries and he's okay, but he did not go back in his house for 6 months.
Wow.
He put it on the market, didn't sell. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it's violent out there.
That's right. Part of that trauma.
That brings us to that question of trauma. And this is a personal encounter with trauma that we're talking about here. But that trauma that these families that we are experiencing and describing in this conversation is part of a historic trauma, right?
Yes.
And I wanted to focus on that today. That's what we're talking about today. And I'm just going to throw that right back at you, Yolanda, just to, when you think about the trauma that we experience individually, how that connects to, it's not isolated. It's not a thing that happens by itself. It's part of a flow and sort of a process and a structure that has in it these pitfalls that are deadly, right?
That's right.
And
That's right.
how do we both understand, but also figure out ways to change the conditions that create trauma and recognize that this is not something that just happened, and often it's not just me. I happen to be the lucky one today.
Right. That's right.
If it wasn't me, it might be somebody else.
That's right.
What do you think?
Well, you know, I've been thinking about this, and one of the things that I think it bears reviewing is 1619 to COVID-19. And so when we talk about 1619, which was when we know as far back as 1619 was when the first enslaved Africans arrived at Jamestown. And that setting started the slavery process. Now, again, we're talking about folks we're not talking about immigration. We're talking about forced slavery. These folks were stolen, right? These folks were kidnapped, they were sold, and they were swindled into a level of forced servitude for 400 years. And so that started our trauma. That was the core of the African American
experience,
core of our experience. And so that is the historical vortex, if you will, of our community. And so from there, when we start talking about peeling the onion, the core was 1619. And that kept resonating in my mind when I was preparing for this conversation today. When we talk about historical trauma. You know, some folks try to dismiss that we have systemic racism and historical trauma. The board of the journal of psychology noted the research has been done in Maryland talking about intergenerational trauma, that it is a part of, and it is noted, it is researched that it's a part of our DNA. And we are past that DNA on from generation to generation for centuries. So when we talk about centuries, we're talking about, you know, 400 years with 4 to 5 generations that have experienced that. And various those first generations, I think about perhaps were in what we're in right now. They were quarantined, they were away from their loved ones, there were people that they didn't know that they had to interact with, they had to survive on basic, you know, our animalistic fight or flight human responses, and that began their trauma, and they responded out of that, and they passed it on to the next generation. And so we have things, as we've all shared here today, we have a way of caring for one another, the way that mama taught us, grandmama taught us, great grandmama taught us. That came from that 1619. So that 1619 trauma experience is also really, quite frankly, I would like to say, has prepared some of us in the African American community, because we haven't had the privilege of not being able to respond to trauma right now. We don't even oftentimes have time to grieve. Our children are murdered, we lose our jobs, domestic violence, you know, all of these things are a part of our, unfortunately, not as much as it used to be, but it's still quite prevalent in our community. So that DNA that we don't realize is in there gets activated when something else, another unfortunate adversity happens to us, and we start responding to that.
That's right,
You know,
we're triggered.
we're triggered. Sometimes we don't even know why in the world did that trigger me? It triggered me because that's a part of our DNA, that traumatic DNA that got passed on to us. So when we talk about historical trauma, I wanted to bring that to bear, to say it's not what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you. And it started in 1619. They didn't have the tools that we have. And some of our children and grandchildren don't have that historical information, and it bears because those ancestors that couldn't read and write, they talked about it through the circles, through the healing circles, through coming together and assuring that everyone in the family understood this is how we do things. And they passed it on. This is the expectation. You know, I was talking to Sherilyn the other day, and I said, you know, when mama get on us, and she used to say, let your name beat you home. I mean, don't go out in the community showing out, because somebody gonna come back and tell me about it. And then that was a part of our community, right? That was a part of our community policing, our community expectations. We all knew about it. So now we have, if you will, we thought we've sort of arrived, and we've kind of pushed away some of those things. So as you were talking about and asking the question, Mr. McFarlane, I think about that DNA and how do we share that information in a way, as we're talking about healing. We're also talking about we don't want to survive. We don't want to continue.
We want to thrive. Yeah.
We want to thrive. So we can take what happened with Tanaya's mother, grandmother, and my mother, and Sherilyn's mother, and your mother, and our ancestors. What do we have that has gotten us to be able to understand how to function in a manner that was, quite frankly, healthy? It was healthy for our grandparents to tell us, now, baby, when you go, I know you may not understand this, But when you talk to Mr. Sam, I need you not to look Mr. Sam in the eye. Well, how did that trigger us? That felt like we were selling out, or we were, I'm just as grown as he is. They were protecting us. They
I
were.
have a story like that, and I'll ask you to sort of walk me through my feelings, because I feel it today like I felt it then. I was 12 years old, I think, maybe 11. And my great grandmother's sister lived with us, and she might have been close to 100 at the time. And I remember her because she would have us go to the store and buy Garrett snuff. That was
Yes.
the brand of snuff we used. And have us go out in the yard and take a twig. I'm not sure what kind of branch we had, a shrub in the front yard, but take a twig, and she would take that and clean her teeth with a twig from a plant out of the front yard of the house. But one day she called me in and said, "Alvin, I just want to tell you," and I guess this might have been her dispensing of her duty of instruction to me.
Yes.
When you go around those white people, you make sure you say yes, and no.
No, sir.
You make sure you say no, sir.
Yes.
No, yes, sir.
Yes.
And she was specific in how to say it. And so I recall Yolanda standing there listening to her. She's done, she lived on the sick beds. I'm standing there 10, 12 years old, and she's giving me this instruction. I remember feeling just mad, white hot mad, not at her.
Yes. Right.
But at the situation.
That's right.
Because I knew she was telling me what she felt I needed to know, because she wanted me to live.
That's right.
And I'm thinking, I know the world is different from when you were my age, but I'm respectful. But really, was it different? Probably not.
That's right.
She was probably right. I thought I knew.
Right.
But she was probably right in describing the world, because I was at risk then, just like I'm at risk now, simply because I'm Black. Right.
That's right.
And it's
more so then
of the pandemic of 1619. So I just share that with you, because that's how real it is. It's personal.
It is personal. And that was their way of protecting us, quite frankly. So what you're feeling right now is triggering that young man that in you, that young boy in you, that you knew that what great grandma was sharing with you was important, and you respected her. However, you had that feeling of, I'm just as good as them. Why do I have to bow down to them? But that was her way of protecting you then, so that you wouldn't be a George Floyd today. And that same diabolical devaluing disrespect of our Black men, number one, it was a part of that DNA. We don't want to have to do it, but in order to protect what's important to us, we talk to our sons and grandsons today about how do they drive, how do they shop, how do they work. So it's not just Jim Crow back in the 50s and the 30s, but it's Jim Crow that is connected to COVID-19. Why is it that we did not in our community receive the vaccine at the same time? Our healthcare workers, our workers who are boots on the ground, why didn't they get the vaccine when everybody else got the vaccine? Right? So that dispelling and devaluing triggers in us. It activates. So you were reactivated just now hearing that story, because we all have those stories, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
From our family.
I just want to add something. We got the vaccine the same time as the other folks. It was released. But what happened was the companies that were distributing the vaccine somehow made a way for the whites to get an appointment, which should have been ours. Because I think told you I gave shots at Earl Brown in February. And I think we did 1,200 shots that day. And, Earl Brown Center is in Brooklyn Center. That's a predominantly Black and brown community.
Yes.
I saw 5 Black people, maybe 3 to 4 people of other ethnicities that were non-white. Now, a lot of these people came from various suburbs or South Minneapolis. Somehow they managed to get an appointment. I asked a question about that. I said, this is a whole family here. They're not healthcare workers or teachers. This is mother, grandmother, the young person down to 18. Who's the healthcare worker? Who's the teacher here? That's not for you. You're just here to do X, Y, Z. You don't worry about it,
Just like
And
that.
I said, first thing I'm gonna do, you know what I did, Al? I put it when they asked to interview me on TV. I told the story.
That's right. That's right. That's
because something is going on with the distribution.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Even though they said that they're opening it up to us,
Mm-hmm.
the vaccine was supposed to go to us. But
so that's another microaggression, right? That's another microaggression.
I wouldn't even say microaggression. I would call that that's on purpose. That is planned.
Microaggressions are on purpose.
Right, but I mean, this was a plan by the distributor to make sure that the Europeans were covered and heck with us, which is it's the usual treatment that we've always gotten. And then when you were talking about basically epigenetics is what it's called, what you were talking about, how the historical trauma changes our genetic coding, which gets passed down from mother, child, and to the next generation, because the same stressors continue to be exerted on our bodies, which causes stress hormones to be released. It's like putting you in a pressure cooker, Al, and we turn the fire up. And we wonder why the potatoes in there are falling apart. We only wanted to boil them a little bit, but they are just falling apart. That's what happens to us over the years, over the centuries. Each century, there's more pressure put on us, more stress, and the stress never lets up. That's why when we have babies, we have more incidences of the mother not doing well or the child not doing well during labor, because the constant physical demands based on the psychological and emotional stresses we are under. My niece, who's got a master's degree, and her sister both had preeclampsia. Healthy. They were healthy. And the only way you can equate that is to the stress of being in a racist society with all the pressures that have gone on your whole entire life. Now, their mother, my sister, is a nurse practitioner with a doctorate. So we're not dealing with people here who, they say, they weren't taken care of. They didn't have this. They had it all. But the historical trauma, the systemic racism doesn't care who you are, your social economic level, your education. The doctor in Indianapolis, Dr. Brown, who had COVID, who died in the ICU while begging them to give her certain tests, to do this and that, and she could feel her body failing. And what she did was videotaped her experience right there in the ICU and put it on Facebook and on the internet so that she could see. So if this isn't historical trauma acting out again, if this isn't the whole slave mechanism to not only enslave us, but to torture Black and brown bodies and to have no compassion for our humanity, I don't know what to tell you. This woman should be alive to take care of other patients. She was an MD. She knew what was going on. She wasn't, and she's begging the doctor to do this, do that. But see, they can ignore us in the hospital. And that's why you need an advocate when you go to the hospital. I
And
have
that's why
people that call me all the time when they're going to the hospital. Say, Shirley, could you come to the hospital? I just want you to kind of look things over, ask some questions for me. I said, sure, be glad to do it.
Mm-hmm.
You need an
and so
advocate.
those enhancements that we're talking about, oftentimes we've talked about this, and tonight I want you to, kind of jump in there too, but we talk about how have we historically managed stress. We didn't know that it was stress with shortness of breath, or hands get clammy, and, we have a headache, and our vision is blurred, and we are we're anxious, and we are jittery and irritable. And what have we had? Well, we've been marginalized, and we've been left out, or as Shirley said, just ignored, purposely done. And so we had to, within our community, to find a way. We had healers, we had grandma, we had great grandma, and because number one, we economically and financially, we were not able to afford a doctor, or we didn't have one that would see us. So we had home remedies. And often, some of the coping strategies that we use, alcohol was a big one. So we have some of these maladaptive coping strategies that we're still using. We don't go to the doctor. Why? Well, mama didn't go to the doctor. My grandma didn't go to the doctor. Why do I need to go to the doctor? Therefore, we have these medical concerns. We have, undiagnosed or untreated hypertension, undiagnosed, untreated diabetes, undiagnosed, untreated heart disease, cancer, all of um, um, these medical anomalies, prostate cancer, breast cancer. By the time we've gotten to the medical provider, most times we're in the last stages. And so, as we know, because we have that fear of, am I going to be marginalized with the doctor? Are they going to take what I say serious? How can I ask those questions when I don't know what questions to ask? So that historical trauma continues to show itself not only in our bodies, but in our communities. What do I mean by that? Charlene just gave an example of that we're still doing drive-bys. Why? Why our children feel the need to continue to harm one another? They want to be included. They want to be feel empowered. How are they doing that? They're mapping it out. They're displaying it in a manner that's harmful. Why are we still having domestic violence in our homes between husband and wife and partners? Why is that happening? That's that time bomb that Shirley's talking about. That's erupting, oftentimes with little or nothing. Well, what happened? Well, I just asked him to come on and, take his bath so I could set the table. And he erupted. He often, when talked to, he doesn't know, something triggered him in that conversation that perhaps someone may have disrespected him or demeaned him that day or that week. It's a compilation of missed opportunities to be heard and to voice those feelings and those incidents.
Yes,
Yolanda, I just want to
those are
ask Tanaya.
absolutely. Oh,
Yeah, go ahead, Tanaya. I wanted to
oh,
ask you, in your
yes.
family and what you have experienced or understand all of this to be.
Well, actually, I was, yeah, thank you for asking, because I really wanted to, everything that Miss Yolanda described are the classic trauma responses that we're doing with the drive-bys. The, fixations to trauma is what I pretty much call, this repetitive cycle of drive-bys and killing each other, domestic abuse, all of that. Those are classic responses.
Wow.
That's
And
right.
what really resonated with me, Mr. McFarlane, is when you spoke of the anger that you felt
Yes.
back in the day, and the way that that's kind of translated and come down, because I have children that are in their 20s. I have a 20-year-old son, and I can feel his anger from, while we're not in his generation coming up in the 2000s, we weren't saying, okay, say yes ma'am or no ma'am, but we still have a set of rules.
That's
When
right.
you get pulled over, put your hands up on the
That's
steering
right.
wheel, keep
right.
everything up, do not move. So we have these,
Don't talk
we
back.
still have these
That's
things these narratives that, although they've kind of changed, they're still the same. And
That's right.
and how I've noticed that with my son is, with every encounter with the police, his first response is anger.
Yeah.
And it's because, he's a licensed driver. He works. He graduated from school, and we live in a suburb. And here it is, 2021, and they'll stop him for no reason and say, "What are you doing out here?" I live out here. So
You have no place in society.
exactly. And it's, while the actual what we're saying has changed, it's really, we're still devalued. And that's what I've noticed in the generations, just seeing, my great grandmother, my grandmother, on down to my children. The narrative is changed a little, but it's still the same. We're still knowing that we're devalued, and that's why the historical trauma continues. It's because we're just kind of changing up, how to live. And that's what we're trying to do, in essence, live. It's just as Mr. McFarlane saying, yes, no. Put your hands on the dash. We live by a different set of rules. Period.
That's right.
And it's anger turned outward that's
That's
destroying us, our community. When we shoot someone, or a boy shoots a man, he's angry that he wasn't protected by his dad. If his dad's been out here on drugs, alcohol, because that's his coping mechanism.
Absolutely.
He couldn't help it. He felt less than a man. He's been under siege his whole life. And so all he knows how to do is react. And they do feel the stress. We always have. That's what beating your wife and fighting all the time and using substances were. We know we're stressed out, so we are self-medicating in whatever way we can, just to kind of feel a little better, to just not feel so agitated and pained.
Yes, and that's one of the things that I had to come to
I
terms with.
Sure.
Is the historical trauma of a younger man murdering my husband, who was a family man. And I had to really, instead of being angry, this is what actually started my journey into historical trauma. I had to learn, and as I learned about this young man who was only 18 years old at the time, I learned he grew up feeling like no one saw him. He grew up with the same things. I had an opportunity to talk to my husband's murderer. And to this day, I understand that this was historical trauma, that he went out to rob my husband on his way to work.
Wow.
Wow.
We're so damaged.
I have this picture up as we're talking. I went and got this off of my mantle. It's been there for years and years and years, but that's me in the middle at my grandmother's knee. She's got the Bible in her hand.
Oh, yeah.
I think I'm about 4 or 5 years old. And that's me and sister and then cousins. And we're at the like the patriarch of the family is Mr. Powell, my auntie's Miss Powell's husband. So next to my grandmother, holding the Bible to her right, is my great grandmother. And what I brought this to show you is because only recently did I come to think about it and put the numbers together and recognize that when I counted back when this picture was taken and when she was born enslaved. This woman was owned by other human beings.
That's right.
She was enslaved. And so I show that and I look at it from time to time just to remind myself that, we're not that far away.
No.
That a person that, and what I remember about her is that she spanked my hand with a spoon one time down in Sunflower, Mississippi, when I was on the farm that they sharecropped, right? And I stuck my hand in a barrel of a snowy, pillowy cotton in a shed. And because I was, 5 years old or 4 years old and couldn't resist touching this cotton candy stuff. And she said, correct them, get your hand out of there. You don't know what's in there. It could be a snake.
Snake.
So that was the instruction,
That's right.
But it just reminds me, that's how close this is. So and that's how the trauma is as well. Because I'm imagining what she had to go through.
That's
when she was born, right? And what her parents and their parents went through. And that goes back, Yolanda, to what you said, 1619.
Where it all started.
Abduction of our people. The abduction, right? The theft.
That's right.
The theft and the murder of our people.
Slaughter.
Right.
Torture.
So, yeah. And
the raping, we're talking about, talking about sex trafficking. What about my grandmother, my great grandmother, all those women? I had an aunt who is 87, 80. She was the matriarch of our family, now my dad's older sister. But they, talking about how they would hide the girls, how great grandma, we called her Mama. Mama would hide all of the little girls, all of her daughters and granddaughters in the floor. They had taken a floorboard out, and they would, at night, they would hide them so that if the master would come in during the night, because it didn't matter, he'd come in, he would rape them 8 years old or 80 years old, whatever his appetite was. And so Mama used to get beat all the time, because when he would come in there to have his way and couldn't find those girls, he was outraged. And how dare you hide these girls? So when we talk about sex trafficking, they were trafficking women, girls, little girls that had no choice. And there was, and men, husbands, fathers, grandfathers were there in the same room and watch these men have their way with their wives, their daughters, their granddaughters, babies. They could say nothing. And so when we talk about covering, why don't the Black men cover us as a Black woman? One of my triggers is every time I see a Black man with a white woman, it triggers me. Why? Because it says to me that I'm not good enough. Where did that start? Well, he started wanting to do that to these women because it comes from they abused my women, my mother, my daughter. And so there's that microcosm and that intersection of unspoken, atrocities that people don't want to talk about anymore. My dad just told me a couple of weeks ago, he said, daughter, I just drank my first Coca-Cola. I said, oh, Dad, come on. He said, no. He said, in Louisiana back in the 30s, he said, Black folks weren't good enough to drink Coca-Cola. They wouldn't allow, it was against the law for a Black person to drink Coca-Cola. I said, why? He said, well, in that parish, the mayor, the townsmen, the men in authority, white men in authority, said Black people weren't good enough to have this good tasting beverage. So these are the things that he is sharing with me now at almost 90 years old. And he's saying to me, my father, who's almost 90 years old, Lord say the same in October. In March of 2021 is the first time he drank a Coca-Cola product. Because he had to convince himself that he was good enough at 89 years old. That's a trauma. Are you kidding me? That's a trauma. And so we have layers and layers of that historical trauma that we need to work out. And that's one of the things that we're talking about. And we want, that's why the intergenerational trauma healing circles are so important. It's an imperative that we have these dialogues so folks are able to expose that information and expunge it, externalize it out of the insides. It's a cancer. It's an emotional cancer that is being passed on generation to generation.
I saw Dr. B's note saying that she's 2 generations beyond being enslaved. I think that's a conversation we should have in the future and ask people who are in the community to join us and talk about the nearness right. And the retention or the remaining, the lingering, the
residue,
the residual impact of slavery, and to remind us that this is not theoretical.
That's right.
It's not intellectual. This is lived experience, right?
That's right.
And lived trauma.
Lived nightmare.
The consequences of it are with us every day right now. Well, listen, we're out of time for today. This has been a wonderful conversation. Shirley LaChapelle, thank you as always. To Nanya Hurd, thank you as always. And dear sister, Yolanda, thank you so much. Thanks to all of us who are involved in the African American Child Wellness Institute, a project that, among other things, is focusing on creating awareness, healing, sustainable health, but addressing the question of COVID-19 right now, and also promoting the idea that we should follow the science and get tested and practice the protocols that will keep us safe and move our families forward. But understand that this is also an opportune time to tell the truth about the impact of the failures of the institutions, right? And of the society, to acknowledge our humanity. And now we have to be responsible for the change that we seek. Thank you all so much. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
And
thank you.
We'll see you next time. Take care.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Oh, Queen Justice, where are you? Did they beat you up or no? Lock you on the ground, take the crown away from you?
Oh, Lady Liberty, red, white, and blue. Did they take your dignity with their bigotry? Teach you that you're born to lose.
Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. Better believe, roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be tough. We all agree, we've had enough.
We've had enough
of all the rules you break.
We've had enough
of all the money you make.
We've had enough.
No more life at stake.
We've had enough.
This is a proclamation.
It's been 400 years and we're 400 late. Together we stand from state to state. Going back in time won't make America great. We need justice now, people won't wait.
Action, no more distraction. Every step we take, we gain traction. If it can happen to one, it can happen to all. United we stand, divided we fall. Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. Better believe, roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be tough. We all agree, we've had enough.
We've had enough
of all the rules you were breaking.
We had enough
of all the money you were making.
We had enough.
No more life gets taken.
We had enough.
This is a proclamation.
Free or guilty,
It's gonna get filthy.
you better believe. Just roll up your sleeves.
It's gonna get rough. It's gonna be tough.
We all agree, we've had enough. We've had enough
Of all the rules you're breaking.
We've had enough.
All the money you're making.
We've had enough.
No more life gets taken.
We've had enough.
This is the proclamation.
We've had enough.
Trayvon Martin and Tommy Rice.
We've had enough.
Michael Brown and Eric gonna pay the price.
We've had enough.
Philando, Breonna, George Floyd.
What? We've had enough.
So many